Good morning. Meaningless. Everything is utterly meaningless, said every devout San Diego Chargers fan today, right? I was going to wear my San Diego Chargers jersey this morning, just, in protest, right? But I had forgotten that 2 years ago, I had poured lighter fluid all over it and burned it when the Chargers left for Los Angeles. Am I bitter? Yes, I am. Okay, it's a hard day for Chargers fans, and we're just going to heal together this morning as we celebrate Super Bowl Sunday, but also mourn the loss of our team, which honestly is a great segue, go figure, into our message today, because we're going to talk about seasons and timing and how life offers us highs and lows and everything in between, and what the Bible has to say about that. Ecclesiastes is such a great book, and then we're studying that over the next few weeks, and Jared did such a great job last week kind of setting up this book, this really important book by King Solomon. And it's not, as Jared mentioned last week, it's not necessarily an encouraging, inspirational book. It's actually kind of heavy, and it feels somewhat like a rant. Maybe somebody who's a little grumpy towards the end of their life. And yet within the context and within the chapters and some of the ideas that are pulled out in Ecclesiastes, we actually can find a lot of truth for our own lives. And so today I want to look at this idea of different events and different seasons of our lives and what they mean, and how do we embrace them and not resist them. Because I think a lot of our suffering and a lot of our just frustrations in life and with God come when we have a certain expectation of what should happen in our lives, or a certain expectation of what we should think should happen in this relationship, or a certain expectation that we have in terms of how our career is going or what our kids should be doing. And those expectations and sort of what we think life should look like can create a lot of frustration and actually rob us of the joy and the enjoyment that God is offering us every single day. And the key for us is to maybe put aside our expectations and to step back and say, God, what are you doing here? What is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn? What is this in this particular season? Maybe you're frustrated right now and you feel stuck, and maybe you have some goals and some resolutions that you're going after, and it feels like things are stalled out. Or maybe you're just in a tough relational time right now, and maybe you're in a marriage that doesn't feel very exciting, or maybe you're having some tough things with your family. You're like, God, this season, what is this all about? And you want to rob yourself of enjoyment? You just start defining those seasons. You start putting labels on those seasons. You start resisting maybe the work that God is inviting you and I into, and saying, hey, perhaps even in a season that I don't want to be in, I can find that strand of glory, something eternal. Because in Ecclesiastes, sort of this whole idea of meaningless, doesn't matter. Really what the author is saying here is that everything matters when given an eternal perspective. I don't like waiting. I'm a fairly impatient person. And this week I had to wait for a garage repair man to come and fix my garage. We were having some issues with our garage door. It wasn't going all the way down. It was kind of going halfway down and then wobbling and then going back up. And it's amazing how dependent you are on a garage door opener. You don't really realize that until it goes out. And so it went out. And so we called the Sears garage door repairman, which, by the way, I didn't even know Sears was still in business, but apparently they're fixing garage doors now. And so we called them up. And like any repairman, and all of us are familiar with this, all of us have experienced this before with repairmen and contractors, or maybe in deliveries, that they give you this window of time, right? They say, we may show up between, and this is what they told me, Mike, we may show up between 8 a.m. or 11 a.m. We're going to give you that 3-hour window. And I'm like, wow, that's just not very helpful, honestly, because I basically have to put my life on pause and not leave the house, not plan any other thing as I hope that you will show up at some time between 8 and 11. And it also puts you on edge, right? I know they were supposed to text me before, give me that 30-minute window. They give you the 3-hour window, and then they give you the 30-minute window. And so they're supposed to text me. So I'm always looking at my phone. Did they text me? Did I miss anything? We're on edge, and this waiting season and this time where it's kind of like, well, it could be this or it could be that. That's difficult for us. We're not wired that way. We don't like to wait. We don't like to not have precision. And yet God says, hey, I'm going to be kind of imprecise. It's going to be maybe a window between 8 and 11 before this all sort of comes together for you. And what are we going to do with that? How are we going to approach that with our lives? Here's where God says there's a time. It's time for everything, even when we don't like the timing or the thing. The reality is you might be in a situation right now, in a season of your life, in your story, and you're like, I don't like the timing of this. It's highly inconvenient. It's highly frustrating. This is not what I expected. And you might be in a season right now where you're like, this is not the thing that I want, God. This is not the thing that I signed up for. Maybe it's a health issue. Maybe it's a financial issue. What is that thing for you? And perhaps this morning, instead of resisting it, judging it, wishing it was different, maybe we can lean into this season and find that strand of glory. There's this artist named Scott Erickson, and he posted this picture this week on Instagram. I want to show it to you. It's just this big old sailboat, and there's this flag hanging over the sailboat and the ship, and it says, there is more. This idea of adventure and vision and great plans that we have, and yet we're in a little fishbowl. It feels like we're not moving. It feels like we're not making any progress. And I know if you're in that place right now, and maybe you're loaded up with a lot of energy for the future, and you have dreams and goals, and you want things for your life and for your kids and for your career, and you set your mind on these things of how the world is supposed to work, and it's just not happening for you, and it feels like you're stuck in a fishbowl. God says to us, embrace it. Embrace it, because every moment, every eternal moment matters. This right now, you being at CRB, sitting in that little soft theater chair right now, that matters. You having breakfast with your kids matters. You showing up to work and maybe not loving your job right now, but you showing up to work and doing your contribution there, it matters. Everything matters. You see, everything isn't meaningless unless you're disconnected from God's story. Everything is meaningless. But when you lean into his eternal perspective and the work that he's doing in your heart and in your life in this season, all of it matters. And so let's look at Ecclesiastes 3. And again, this is written by King Solomon, probably towards the end of his life. A little bit grumpy, but he's talking about these ideas of seasons. And he goes this, he says, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. And then the writer goes into sort of what we could consider a poem or some poetic writing here. And he says there's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot. Says there's a time to kill and a time to heal. And by the way, the Bible is not encouraging murder here. That's not what a time to kill is about. It's really about sometimes there's things that are happening like war or conflict where killing is necessary. And there's also a time to heal. It says there's a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh. I mean, thinking about the time to weep, many of us resist those seasons where we have to mourn something or grieve something when we resist the emotions that are in our heart. But God says, there is a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. That's a reference to agriculture and planting, like when you would want to plant crops in your field, you would gather up the stones and take the stones out of the soil so you could produce a harvest. And so there's these different times. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend. And so the writer is just pendulating back and forth, these different times, these different seasons. A time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And then finally it says, what do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. And that's sort of, again, grumpy Solomon, ranting Solomon. I see the burden, I see the meaningless. And this is what he says. He says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. He's made everything beautiful in its time. Let me do a little drawing here to kind of talk about this idea of everything becoming beautiful in its time, no matter what you're facing. So here we have time. Okay, and as time progresses and time goes on, and then let's say there's this line, okay? And we're going to call that the beautiful line. This is the point where God makes something beautiful in your life. And all of us have these different experiences and different moments and events in our lives. Let's say in your story, maybe there's a season of addiction. Maybe in your story, there's a significant financial setback, okay? Maybe there's betrayal in a relationship. We have these different things that have happened over the seasons of our life. And what the Bible is telling us is that these things over time move towards becoming beautiful. See, if we place those things in God's hands, they're going to eventually cross over into being a blessing. And I know sometimes that's a hard concept for us to realize or think about or embrace. Like we look at those painful moments of our stories. We look at the addiction. We look at the financial setback. We look at the divorce. We look at the betrayal. We think of that season where our life felt like chaos. And we go like, God, what are you going to do with that? Well, what the Bible's telling us is that he's moving all of these things to a place called beautiful. He's turning everything into beauty over time. He turns it into this gift. Our setbacks become our superpowers. And the mistake that we make, you and I make, and I see this happen a lot when I'm counseling people through these difficult times, is what we do is we put my meaning on these events too soon. We define them. We say what that experience meant. We look at our addiction and we feel shame. We feel embarrassment. Or we look at this financial setback that we had in our career, or maybe you lost a home or suffered through bankruptcy, and you look at that and you put on yourself some meaning that says, I'm irresponsible. I can't be trusted with money. And that is unfortunately what we do with those seasons that are uncomfortable and these seasons we didn't want to go through. Instead of waiting for God over time to bring these things across the beautiful line and not putting our meaning on it, not putting our interpretation on it, but putting eternal meaning on all those events. putting God's story, God's perception, God's plan over these things. And so if you feel like maybe right now you're in a season, you're like, this is where I'm at. It hasn't crossed over into the beautiful. I'm not seeing the eternal value of my suffering or my pain, thing that I'm going through right now in my marriage. It just feels like there's nothing beautiful about this right now. Or maybe the thing that maybe you're unemployed right now and you're looking for work and you're like, there's nothing beautiful or eternal about that. But over time, and the truth is, let's be honest, many of us can look at those setbacks and those failures and that suffering, and if we looked back 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we could see the greater story, right? We could see how that season was important. I want to show you a picture of my wife and I. This is us. That's me and her almost 30 years ago when we first started dating. We've been now married, celebrating our 25th anniversary in June. We dated for 5 years. This is 30 years ago. And I look at this picture and I think, wow, that just feels like a very, very long time ago. How many of you have those photo frames where they display different pictures, or maybe you have your computer set up this way and it pulls up just photos from the past years, and maybe you're looking at your kids and like, oh, they look so young, and you just kind of reminisce and you think about like, wow, I just feel like a different person. I honestly, I look at that picture and I go, I don't really know who that guy is. Yeah, he's got the glasses. He's still kind of not maybe choosing great wardrobe choices. But I look at that guy and I go, that guy has no idea what's in store for him, especially as he's standing next to that woman that he loves and still loves today. Like I think so often in our relationships, and especially in marriage, we lose perspective. Spent a lot of time counseling couples, and it's amazing to me, and one of the things I try to do with them is I watch two people bicker and fight and be angry with each other and be so disconnected, and I think about this couple, and I think there was some point in this relationship where they truly loved each other. They were passionate about each other. They were grooving with each other. But here we are. And so sometimes in that work is just inviting them. I know this moment feels really tense and frustrated, and maybe they're angry, but sometimes getting the larger perspective about who we are as a couple, who we are as a family, helps us get a more eternal perspective of what God is doing in our lives. The idea of finding the strand of glory in each other, I think that's one of the most difficult things to do. Finding the gift, finding the strength, finding the quality that we admire sometimes in our most intimate and close relationships is quite difficult. And so here's what I have found, and maybe you have found this to be true too. You see what you look for. You see what you look for, especially in relationships. A couple weeks ago, I misplaced my AirPods. And all of you are familiar with AirPods, or those little white things you put in your ears and listen to music, made by Apple. And they come in this little white charging case, right? And I had misplaced them. And I'm kind of a creature of habit. I have rhythms and systems, and normally I put things in their right place. Like I know where my car keys are at. I know where I put my wallet. I know where I put my AirPods. And I could have sworn that I had put my AirPods in my green backpack, because that's where I always keep them. But they had gone missing, and I had checked my backpack several times. I'm like, where are my AirPods? I cannot find them. And I checked every pant pocket, every jacket pocket. I'm just searching all over the place. I go back to the backpack. Still, I cannot find them. And then this week, finally, I was about to go down to the Apple store to buy a new set of AirPods because I was so frustrated. They're just gone, and I need my AirPods. And so I did one final search in my backpack, my green backpack that I had looked in 5, 6, maybe 7 times already. I looked back in there, and lo and behold, there they are. Now, here was the problem. I forgot that the white case that my AirPods come in, I forgot that I had bought a little protective covering case for those, and it was a black case that I had put over it. And so when I was looking in my green bag, I was looking for a white AirPod case when it was actually a black AirPod case because I had put a cover over it. And so I had searched and spent so much energy and time looking for these AirPods, and I could not see them. And yet when I looked in that bag, they were right there the whole time. They were right there. It's like inches away from my face, and yet I could not see them. Why? Because I was looking for something else. I was looking for white AirPods. And if I didn't see white AirPods, then the AirPods must not be in there. If I didn't see the white case, then it means my AirPods are not in my green backpack. We do this with our life. We do this with our relationships. We are looking for something. You want to create suffering in your life. You just have all these expectations that you put on each other. Put all kinds of, well, he should take out the trash, or she should be more affectionate, or they should do, like anytime we get in sort of what we think it should be and what it should look like and versus what it actually is, you're going to create a lot of suffering and you are not going to enjoy life. And so think about your eyes. Think about what you're looking for. Are you seeing the strand of glory in each other, even when the season is difficult? Even when it's frustrated, maybe when you're like, can you find the strand of glory in each other? The Bible says this in Matthew. It says the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? The point here is let your eyes, and part of seeing the strand of glory, finding the meaning in the meaninglessness, finding the eternal in those mundane moments, those frustrating seasons of our lives, is letting God's light our eyes. Having that perspective, having the sense of like, God, what are you up to here? Because I'm really frustrated right now, and I don't really like this, and this person is really irritating me. Or, God, what are you doing here in this season of my life? Because I feel like I'm not making any progress. I feel spiritually dry. I'm even doubting that you're existing. Whatever the season might be, I invite you to let your eyes be filled with God's light and God's perspective, that over time, whatever you are experiencing this season, in this now, that you know it is moving to this beautiful place, this eternal place. And God tells us through Scripture, everything matters. This moment matters. So let's talk a little bit about relationships and love and the difficulty of that, and how do we kind of work through the different seasons of relationships. Well, let's look at this. Love naturally cycles in relationships. It pendulates, just like a time for mourning, a time for dancing. Same goes for relationships. Closeness and distance, connection and disconnection, ease and tension. It's not good or bad, it just is. And so again, sometimes we bring these expectations of how it should look, how the relationship should be, and it doesn't look like that. And we have to just embrace and welcome the fact that relationships have cycles too. They move in and out. And too many times I meet with couples, married couples, and they're in a season that feels disconnected or doesn't feel very close or doesn't feel very passionate, and they want to quit because they think this is what it's going to be for the rest of their lives, that it's broken. We can't fix anything. versus no, this is what relationships do. There's been, Jennifer and I, my wife, we've been together for, 30 years, and there's been times where we have been just like super, super on the same page. There's been times where we have been like, as far as from the east and from the west. There have been times in our marriage where we just like, we're grooving and so in love and clicking. And there's been seasons, mostly in the child rearing seasons, where it's like, I don't really particularly care for you. That's how we say it in church, by the way. But here's the thing, in order to get through 25 years of marriage and 30 years of a relationship, we didn't quit when it didn't feel right. And by the way, I want to be really clear here too on relationships, and I just think this is important to say. Like if you were in a toxic, abusive relationship, I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm saying. It's like just stick it out. That's a very different thing. But I think what I am saying in terms of many of our relationships kind of sit in this place of like, I'm bored with her. Yeah, he's annoying. And we give up. We don't see what God is trying to do here in this dry season of our relationship, or this difficult season of maybe a friendship that you're in, or maybe right now you're feeling spiritually empty and dry. You're like, I just gotta give up on God. Don't. Realize that it's part of a larger process that he's inviting us into. So relationships, I think relationships also have seasons, right? Not only do they pendulate, but they also have seasons. And let's look at a couple of the seasons. So number one, the first season is, I think in most relationships, there's gonna be a hot season where you're connecting, where you're in love, it's passionate, right? It feels right and you're one, okay? And we love that, but that most relationships don't stay there. You can't live there all the time, because there's other seasons that will happen. For example, this next season, this blooming. Like blooming to me is like a growth season. And through growth, and when we're growing in our relationship, and we're growing together as a couple, what that looks like is, it's exciting and it's new, but growth and change can be painful. You think about springtime, there's a lot of beauty and a lot of change and flowers, but there's also pollen, right? And if you suffer with allergies like I do, all of a sudden it's like there's all kinds of beauty, but that pollen is getting my nose, and so there's allergies too. And so as you're growing and changing together, you can expect, lots of new growth and new things and new adventures, but also maybe some struggle there too. And let's embrace that. Let's look at that. And then finally, the next one, fall. And the fall season for relationship is where really we're letting things go. That's a healthy part of our relationship, where maybe there's things that you have held on to, maybe an expectation that you had of that person that you can release. Maybe you've been hurt in the past, and maybe you're just able to process that and release it. And letting things go is a natural part of relationships. And then finally, I think a lot of couples that I talk to is this frost season. Feels a little frosty, feels a little cold, feels a little disconnected. Here's the thing, in agriculture and crops, one of the most devastating things that can happen to crops and farmers is not floods, is not droughts, it's not hurricanes, but frost. Because what frost does, when we allow frost to set into our relationships, or when frost comes and sets into groves of oranges or plants, what happens is it freezes just sort of the surface level of the soil, and that frost is enough to kill all the roots that go down into the soil. And so if you're in a frosty place in your relationship, I encourage you to warm that up. And how do we warm that up? It's really actually quite easy. It's just what the farmers do. They start covering their plants. They keep them warm from the frost. And I'm not telling you to cover your life with a blanket, but what I am telling you to do is cover your life and your relationship. If you're in a frosty season right now, cover it with God's love. Cover it with God's truth. And secondly, cover it with community. Because when we are in that place where it just feels cold, feels like hopeless, feels like we're so disconnected, We need to have other people in our lives encouraging us. That's why table groups are so important. That's why community is so important. That's why we are always looking for ways at CRB to connect you with each other, because that helps with the frost that is set in to our relationships. Everything has a season. Everything has a time. And it is looking at, as the Bible tells, looking for eternal meaning, looking at the larger perspective, looking at maybe right now you are in that Sears garage repairman stage of waiting from 8 to 11 and you're not sure like when is he going to arrive? Maybe you're in that season and you're just waiting like, God, when are you going to make meaning out of this? When are you going to explain this to me? When is this all going to come together? When are we going to cross the beautiful line for my story? I promise you it's coming. I promise you that is the work that God is doing in your story behind the scenes. Don't fear. He is turning everything beautiful in its time. Let's bow our heads in prayer. God, thank you so much for teaching us to be patient. God, allowing us to feel frustrated, allowing us to mourn, allowing us to tear, but then also allowing dancing and enjoyment and celebration, allowing healing. And God, I pray that you help us just to trust you in every moment in whatever season that we're in right now. God, I pray for relationships, marriages. They may be feeling frosty and cold and confused. God, I pray that you just cover them with your love and your goodness and the warmth of your truth, that you make everything beautiful in its time, that every season matters. God, we love you. We thank you that we get to be a part of this really big, complicated, sometimes difficult story, but you give it such meaning, give it such power, and you're just drawing us every day closer to you. We love you. We thank you. And it's in your son's name we pray. And all God's people said, amen.